This is Bremner Morris, and today I'll be presenting on the next wave of the creator economy. Kind of interesting to be doing a presentation in this sense where I don't get really any audience feedback or any opportunity to hear, how things are landing. So I really want to make sure that this is as, sort of collaborative and participatory of a session as possible. So my big ask to everybody on the line is, if you have any questions, if you have any comments, please feel free to chime in via the chat. And I want this to be more of an open flowing dialogue than just me presenting at you. So with that, really excited to be here and be presenting at the Marketplace Conference, and also participating in the creator economy track, which is really great validation of everything that's been happening over the past few years within the creator economy. And I know you've heard from other folks throughout the day about the sort of history of the creator economy and how we got to where we are today. So I'll touch on a little bit of that during my presentation. But really what I'm focusing on is, how is Web3 and crypto going to make an impact on the creator economy? And for the folks in the audience who are operators, VCs, and others, what are some lessons that I've learned as I've migrated from the Web2 world into the Web3 world that hopefully you can take home to learn a little bit more. So just a quick introduction. I'm Bremner Morris. During my career, my last role was at Patreon, where I was the head of revenue and go-to-market at Patreon for about 4 years. And for those of you that aren't familiar with Patreon, Patreon's a marketplace for creators to launch their own memberships with their fans. So I joined Patreon when they were about 30 people, had about 50,000 creators on their platform, and all of their growth had been driven through viral word of mouth adoption. And my role was to essentially sort of take control of that growth and figure out how we were going to scale out the creator economy, but more importantly, how we were going to focus in on membership as a form of independence and monetization for creators. And by the time I left it about a year ago, we had gotten to about 200,000 creators that were earning about $2 billion per year in payments. So I've been really lucky to be at sort of the outset of the creator economy, and especially what I'll talk about in a second, which is what I would call the creator economy V3. And now moving into V4 with the organization that I'm now the CEO of, which is Rally. And Rally.io is essentially a platform that helps creators establish their own digital economies built on top of crypto, blockchain, and Web3 infrastructure. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means. But essentially, I've had this opportunity to be sort of on the cutting edge of the creator economy over the past 4 or 5 years. And it's been really exciting to see the validation of creators and the opportunities that are offered to creators in order to really structure a meaningful and vibrant career. So just before I jump into the overall presentation, I wanted to give a little bit of a view on what Rally is, because I think it helps frame a lot of the lessons learned within the migration to Web3. So Rally is a platform for powering independent, community-driven economies via social tokens and NFTs. And for those of you who aren't familiar with crypto terminology, social tokens are really essentially a cash-like token that can function as a form of payment, transaction, and validation within your economy. And so creators, when they come to Rally, are really trying to take control over their own monetization and offer social tokens as a way for their fans to participate within their community by holding social tokens, by transacting with social tokens, by using those social tokens as a badge of authenticity of their participation within that creator's community and within that creator's economy, but essentially serving as this form of transaction value within a creator's economy in the form of a fungible token. And then the other side of this coin is the concept of NFTs, where the utility, the recognition, the memorabilia, the tickets, the pieces of artwork, the things that the creator creates and that the community creates are validated and packaged within a non-fungible token, which is the other side of an effective economy. And so from Rally's perspective, we think that a effective economy for a creator allows them to offer the ability for fans to hold some form of cash in the form of social tokens, and then convert that cash into some form of memorabilia or recognition or utility in the form of NFTs. And so Rally has been on this mission for publicly about a year, and then before that in development for about 3.5 years. whereby we're making it really easy for any creator who has a community to show up, launch social tokens and NFTs, and then offer this entire economy for their fans and their communities to participate. So that's the brief elevator pitch on Rally. So I'll talk a little bit about the progression of the creator economy, and I'll talk about 3 stages of the Web2 creator economy. Creator economy V1, as I look at it, was essentially the internet allowing anybody to distribute and produce content and gain access to an audience. So creators, when they were entering into the creator economy V.1, they essentially had this new mechanism for going out and engaging and building an audience. And so this is the type of, these were the types of platforms like MySpace, Facebook, the early phases of Twitter, the early phases of Instagram, that essentially allowed anybody on the internet to go out and create a community. And we started to see the concept of an online content creator begin to emerge. That said, we were so early in this adaptation of the creator economy that many folks just saw this as an opportunity to produce content, distribute content, and build an audience. So creator economy V2 was really about when these platforms started to become almost kingmakers and find creators that were going to really build an audience and establish such a global audience that there was an opportunity to build a form of monetization in the form of ad revenue. And so many of these platforms that in the early days of the creator economy had promised sort of seamless distribution and a new way for creators to engage their audience and a new way for them to monetize kind of became this intermediary and a gatekeeper. And so the promise of the internet, where we were maybe going to remove gatekeepers more broadly, essentially just transition power from existing forms of gatekeepers in the offline world into new forms of gatekeepers in the online world. That said, the opportunity that these new platforms offered to creators was that they helped these creators start to see that through advertising revenue, through sponsorships, there were opportunities for them to develop a career on the internet. And we started to see a number of other creators begin to look at the internet as an alternative mechanism for them to establish their career, drive monetization, grow their audience, and engage with their fans in a new and meaningful way, albeit compensated via advertising dollars. And the platforms that they were working with were really beholden to those advertising dollars and another side of the relationship that wasn't directly oriented towards the creator. So the creator economy V3 is essentially where I jump into this situation, where we believe that Patreon, Substack, and a variety of other platforms saw that creators were essentially a second-class citizen for many of these platforms. You know, these platforms had offered them the opportunity to produce and create content, to distribute that content to their fans, to grow a global audience. But ultimately, those initial platforms of social distribution were really trying to develop the ability to monetize the creator's efforts by charging advertising dollars on top of the creator's work. And so Patreon, Substack, and others essentially provided an infrastructure that allowed creators to begin to take control and ownership over their relationships with their fans and develop direct financial engagement relationships with their communities. And they essentially put in the hands of creators the power to have a direct and meaningful relationship with their fans and a monetized relationship where fans could go directly to them, creators could go directly to their fans, and they could have this direct transactional relationship with the folks within their community. I just got a quick question via the chat, and it was, how do you expect the gatekeepers will embrace parts of Web3 versus new companies who might disrupt some of them? That's a really great question. And that's something that I might touch on a little bit in the latter half of the presentation, but I don't necessarily address it head on. So I'll do that right now. You know, one of the things that I've seen in making the move to Web3 is that there are a lot of various different assumptions that are built within Web2 that essentially have to be thrown out the window in order to embrace Web3. Centralization of decision-making and of the platform as the sort of core infrastructure that everybody sort of attaches themselves to goes out the window when you embrace Web3. It's much more about decentralization. It's much more about community building. It's much more about other opportunities for people to latch into the ecosystem or build into the ecosystem rather than it all to be within the four walls of a given organization. So there's almost a philosophical challenge when a gatekeeper is thinking about what does it look like to enter Web3. That said, many of these Web3 or Web2 platforms and the gatekeepers therein have such a global audience and have such a head start in engaging with that global audience that there's opportunities for them to embrace this concept of decentralization, and then also offer opportunities for their communities to have more of an impact on how they structure and grow their organization. But that at the end of the day, it essentially takes a Web2 company and a gatekeeper throwing out their existing assumptions of how to grow the organization, and also throwing out many of their margin models, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So what we're starting to see is Web3 primitives, native organizations that are built from the ground up, essentially trying to recreate many of the experiences that gatekeepers have created on the internet. So I'll talk a little bit about that more in the latter half of the presentation, but please feel free to ask that question again if I didn't address it head on. So going back to the presentation, Creator Economy V3 within the Web2 infrastructure provided creators the ability to own direct financial and engagement relationships with their communities, which was an awesome step forward for creators and allowed creators to really see a path towards independence on top of these platforms that had emerged for the Creator Economy V3. Some hallmarks of the Web2 creator economy. The opportunities offered were that platforms and the world woke up to the value of creators. When I first joined Patreon, 5 or 6 years ago, the concept of creators was relatively nascent. And that's kind of funny for us all to think about now, given that creators are sort of eating the internet and they are the topic du jour for the creative internet. But the platforms that allowed these creators to build an audience and engage with that audience and then monetize that audience essentially woke the world up to the fact that there are so many people who have creative interests and that have an ability to build an audience, and that can provide a lot of beauty and value to the internet. It also provided an opportunity for creators to develop the ability to have a full-time career on the internet. And it sparked a creative renaissance where a whole league of creators were working to define the future of their careers and the differences in how you might create content and distribute content to your fan base. Now, the challenges with the Web2 creator internet was that creators were locked in to the four walls of these platforms. Every single one of these organizations, their objective was to drive sort of bottom line for that specific organization. And the creator to fan relationship in many ways was a means to an end. And as a result, many of these platforms were reluctant for partnership and collaboration and opportunities for creators to be able to move their audience across all these various different platforms of engagement and monetize those audiences wherever they see fit. And so creators felt like, okay, I'm building my audience on Twitter, or I'm building my audience on YouTube, or I'm building my audience on Instagram. How can I have that audience travel with me across every single point of integration or interaction when I move across the internet and become a multi-hyphenate creator and I'm leveraging all of these different platforms for engagement? And the second aspect of this is that platforms still capture the majority of the value that the creators create, and the creators don't have the ability to participate in the upside of these platforms. You can see this in sort of the massive growth of every single one of these creator economy platforms, where a lot of the value is captured by the existing organization and the creators who have helped build these platforms and create all the beauty that lives on these platforms haven't had the opportunity to participate in the equity upside of these organizations. And then finally, creators are beholden to the policies of these platforms, and they're still making pennies on their dollar. And so as platforms change their policies, they update what is allowed or not allowed on the platform. They also change their revenue share take rates and those types of things. They change their algorithm. Creators are beholden to these policies, and they don't have any say in how those policies are adapted to suit their needs as a creator. So, ton of opportunities offered by the Web2 creative internet, and a ton of challenges that were presented by these platforms being centralized organizations that were ultimately trying to drive toward their bottom line. There is another question that just popped up into the chat. What are your thoughts on Facebook's rebrand to Meta, and what advice would you have to creators moving to Web3? So, I think one of the things with Facebook's move to rebranding to Meta is that it's really great validation of the concept that many people are going to be living a large part of their lives online within the metaverse. And we're starting to see that even today in this presentation, where our interaction is purely digital, and the representation that I have on my screen is really, in some ways, a metaverse representation. You can see from my background that I've got a cool painting, and that I'm sort of in a beach environment, and that's just a very basic way that I'm presenting myself to the internet. But there's a wide variety of ways that people are doing this with NFTs, where they have NFTs as their profile picture, or NFTs as their actual avatar on a Zoom call, and those types of things. But it's essentially the very early days of folks getting comfortable with and embracing the metaverse. So Facebook, as one of the largest, if not the largest, creator-oriented platform, is essentially saying, look, we brought everybody from sort of an offline interaction with their communities into an online interaction with their communities as Facebook v.1. And then now, as we're continuing to migrate into more of a online interaction between communities, functioning as a metaverse platform rather than just as a social media platform, provides further validation of what this opportunity represents for communities and creators within those communities. Specifically, what advice would I have for creators moving to Web3? Many of these creators that we've chatted with at Rally, are just getting their heads around direct independent monetization via platforms like Patreon and Substack. And so when they're making the move to Web3, they're having to grasp a lot of new concepts. And so what I would say for a lot of creators as they're entering this next phase of their creative career is, one, talk to other creators who've made that jump early. There are many creators who are sort of on the cutting edge of the jump to Web3. Two, actually live and breathe within these communities. So go and join a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization. Go and join various different communities on Discord that are operating within the Web3 world. Potentially go and acquire an NFT or participate in somebody else's social token economy, so that you can see what the mechanism of interaction is for creators and their communities within Web3. The other thing that I would say to creators is that most of the ways in which they've been presented opportunities for monetization on the existing platforms of Web2 have kind of put them into either the creator camp or the fan camp. So creators are one side of a supply side of a marketplace relationship, and fans are the demand side of the marketplace relationship. Web3 actually kind of flips that on its head, where the entire community is building together, and there might be some folks that are bigger, participants within that community who might be the quote unquote creator within that community, but the value of their community is driven by the adoption of their broader fan base, and that fan base has equal and as large of an opportunity to contribute to their adoption of this Web3 infrastructure. So rather than seeing yourself at an arm's distance from your community, actually inject yourself into your own community and understand how and where your community wants to engage with you in a meaningful way in the Web3 infrastructure. And I'll talk a little bit about what I mean in more specifics in a second. But thanks for that question. As I mentioned, the Web3 internet is essentially a paradigm shift that takes all of those assumptions that Web2 marketplace platforms hold to be sort of the law or the rules for how you engage between the supply side and a demand side of a relationship. And what I mean by that is the promise of the Web3 internet is essentially to be a new infrastructure for all internet participants, where it rewards those that contribute to the collective objective of a community. And I'll talk explicitly about a Bitcoin or an Ethereum to start, where essentially each of these new cryptocurrencies that have emerged over the past 7 to 10 years are essentially a community adoption of a new paradigm. And so when Bitcoin launched, there was obviously sort of a structure that was put forward to the internet that said, this is how Bitcoin is going to operate, and this is how we are going to assign value to Bitcoin. But then it essentially said to the entire internet, okay, you're going to collaborate and participate in the adoption of this new paradigm. And we're going to actually compensate you for the adoption of this new paradigm in the form of mining for Bitcoin, where anybody who wanted to participate could have had a computer, could mine Bitcoin and essentially validate each block on the chain, and they would get compensated for it. Ethereum took that to the next level, where it said, not only are we going to allow for there to be a store of value on the internet in the form of Bitcoin, but we're also going to create smart contracts that allow you to program new applications of crypto that can serve a wide variety of experiences. And we're also going to compensate you for your participation in that market via gas, essentially, where for every transaction that is computed on that network, we charge a gas fee, and then we compensate the computers that are participating within that validation for their contribution to the adoption of that paradigm. And so what the infrastructure has enabled is this concept of anybody who participates in the collective objective of a community should be compensated for their effort and essentially have a piece of ownership within the overall adoption of that new infrastructure. And so when you think about that for the creator economy, and I'm stealing Li Jin's words about this because I think she's a really phenomenal thinker in the space, the concept of the creator economy is actually shifting to the concept of an ownership economy, where the ownership economy is the idea that in the future, all platforms will be built, operated, and owned by their users. And essentially imagine a world where you as a user, and not just as the creator, or not just as the fan, or not just as the centralized platform that sits in between creators and fans, is being rewarded with tokens for using a platform proportional to the usage or value driven that you've done for that platform. And so back to the point that I was discussing with creators, where as they enter the Web3 internet, thinking about it as an opportunity to provide their fans and their communities ownership within their economy, and an opportunity to build, operate, and engage with that community and drive mutual outcomes, and then be compensated for it in the form of either social tokens or NFTs, is a way for the creator to change their mindset and say, you know what, I actually don't want to have this arm's length relationship between me and my fans. I actually want to have a collaborative relationship where we're working together to achieve really great and exciting creative outcomes, and offering my fans to participate in that by having a shared stake within my economy. And so when making the jump to Web3, as a result of the way that that it's been structured, that one of the lessons learned as I've entered into Rally is that it is essentially an upheaval of traditional business models. And Chris Dixon has a really great thread about this, where essentially from going from Web 2 to Web 3, your take rate is quote unquote my opportunity. And this is a concept that's sort of borrowed from Jeff Bezos's concept that he said when launching Amazon, your margin is my opportunity. In Web 3, social media platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok have take rates of essentially 100%, and then they pay out a little bit to creators. Web3 platforms like Rally, Mirror, BitClout, et cetera, essentially have effective take rates well below 10%. And in the form of Rally, we have no take rate. Our business model is built in such a way where we're trying to drive adoption of Rally's paradigm and Rally's protocol and Rally's infrastructure via the launch of creator economies. So when a creator launches their economy on Rally, we don't want to take any share of their economy. Rather, we want to encourage them to have 100% ownership over their economy, to take 100% of the proceeds of those transactions. And by proxy, they will be more incentivized to drive overall adoption of their economy because it's a more effective and efficient transfer of value between them and their communities. And then as a result, the adoption of RLY as the backing mechanism of each of these economies, Rally will benefit in that sense. So as an example, almost all of the value is sent back to the users and creators on these platforms. And then finally, in this thread, Web 2 platforms depend entirely on creators for content, yet only give scraps back. And that's just not sustainable. And we're already starting to see that creators are making the migration to the Web3 internet because they recognize that that's just not a sustainable way for them to grow their careers. And so to sort of draw a point to it, Web 2's take rate is Web 3's opportunity. So for any of the folks that are in the audience who are either thinking about building in Web3, thinking about investing in Web3, thinking about pivoting from a Web2 platform into a Web3 platform, or incorporating Web3 into your platform, recognize that the traditional business models of marketplace or platforms of the past kind of need to be thrown out of the window. And you could build back into a revenue share take rate model, but recognizing that it has to be in service of providing more value to the users that are participating on your platform. If not, there will be another platform that ultimately goes and builds a more meaningful economic outcome for the participants that are on the platform. The second thing that I would counsel is that in a Web2 world, it's really about customer acquisition. And especially within the creator economy, most platforms focus on trying to find creators that can build as large of an audience on their platform. And so you have this concept of sort of customer acquisition, CAC, LTV, how many fans can a creator bring, how much engagement can that creator drive on the platform, how big of an audience is every single creator worth. Whereas in Web3, you actually kind of change that model and look to yourself and say, each of these communities is comprised of a variety of different creators, some larger creators, some smaller creators, but essentially this community, what we need to do is provide value to that entire community so that the entire community wants to adopt this new paradigm and really participate on this network. And so what we're going after is community participation, validation from an entire community, rather than going out and acquiring a supply side customer in the form of a creator and a demand side customer in the form of their fans and their users. And so the other thing that I would mention when thinking about making the jump to Web3 is that building in public and with the community is essentially just a bare bone, or not a bare bones. It's it's a requirement in order to be effective within the Web3 economy. I just have two examples of this that are directly from Rally. When I first joined Rally, I joined as an advisor on the go-to-market side of the house. And to start, in order to be hired by the community, I needed to do an entire presentation to anybody who held a wallet that had RLY in it. And every single one of those individuals who had RLY tokens within their wallet were able to vote on my candidacy as an advisor to the network. And then when I wanted to go out and establish a go-to-market strategy and invest in go-to-market initiatives, I had to also produce a presentation to anybody who held an RLY token that talked about what exactly are we going to spend on, how are those things going to drive ROI to the overall network, and then how are we going to measure impact and communicate that back to the community. And ultimately, anybody who has an RLY token within their wallet was able to vote yes or no on the overall budget and the structure in which we were going to be spending those dollars, and then reporting back on a quarterly basis to those folks. Similarly, we actually decentralized Rally as an organization and established 5 separate entities that sit on top of the RLY network. And in order to do that, we made a communication to the Rally community outlining our entire plans for decentralizing the network and then allowing them to vote on various different aspects of that decentralization proposal. As part of that proposal, we also created a separate entity that is run by the community, where the community can invest in new projects that are built on top of the RLY network, that nobody from within Rally's 4 walls is a part of that decentralized investment vehicle. And so when you think about just those 2 examples, and these types of examples are happening every single day on Rally and every single day within these other projects across the Web3 internet, building in public and empowering the community, and also giving the the community builders the ability to be compensated for their effort is, again, just sort of a minimum requirement for building in Web3. Don't take the Web2 view of the world where it has to be built within the 4 walls of a centralized institution. Try and think about other ways for people to participate and for it to be more of an ecosystem of partners that are all collaborating towards one common objective, rather than a centralized institution that is governed from the top down and in a centralized fashion. And wow, I realize I only have 1 more minute. So the last thing I'll say is that when making the jump to Web3, we're at such an early phase of this paradigm shift that it's really more about collaboration versus competition. Everybody who's in the Web3 internet right now is trying to shift economic and societal behaviors and normalize the concept of crypto and Web3 infrastructure for creators and for the economy more broadly. And so one of the things that I had to throw out of my mindset when I jumped from Patreon to Rally is that competition right now is at disservice to this paradigm shift. And that collaboration across a variety of different projects that are all working towards a common objective is a really fantastic core ethos for the Web3 community, and something that I've been really excited to build in. I recognize that there are a few questions that came in that I didn't have a chance to address. So I'll capture those questions and I'll work with the team to figure out how I can respond to those. But I really appreciate the time, and thank you so much for folks who sent in questions. And thanks to the Marketplace Conference team for putting this together. Thank you.